Her stories celebrate the vibrancy of Latino culture while addressing complex issues like immigration, family dynamics, and financial hardships. A former teacher and journalist, she is the author of numerous award-winning works, including Merci Suárez Changes Gears, which earned her the Newbery Medal, and Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass, a novel that continues to spark important conversations about bullying and has often faced challenges in libraries and schools. She has also served in the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, tirelessly advocating for diversity in books. Please join me in welcoming Meg Medina.
Hi, Christopher. How are you?
I'm doing good. What books or authors from your childhood had the greatest impact on you, and how have
Oh,
they influenced the stories you tell today?
so we're going way back in time. So when I was really little, I think my favorite book of all time was Charlotte's Web, a book that still endures. Mostly because it was about friendship. And I grew up in the city. I grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York. And a farm with animals and buttermilk baths and things like that. That just seems so exotic to me, so far away from what my life was. So I don't know. I liked books that sort of transported me. I'm also a girl who grew up in the 70s, right? I was young, I was a kid then. And so Judy Blume's work was really coming on the scene hard. And she was coming with stories that really featured girls and the things that were on girls' minds at the time when the women's movement was really in full, fervor. So I think both of those sorts of books that transport me and books that speak the story of girls and what girls are thinking, that still holds true for me. My books are populated with, of course, all genders and all kinds of characters, but I'm always interested. I usually follow the main character is a girl, asking the hard questions about growing up and just moving through the world.
You mentioned that in your early life experiences in Queens, New York, and later Massachusetts inspired your writing. How do these personal moments shape the characters and themes in your books? Care
Did I
to
grew
elaborate a bit more?
up? Sure. Well, all right. So the first thing I'm going to say is I did have a growing up experience in both those places. When I was in Flushing, Queens, I was living with my mom and my sister and my mother's family. They had come from Cuba and they settled in Flushing, Queens. At that time, like now, big immigrant community, and it was, where we landed. And later in high school, I went to live with my father, who lived in Massachusetts. So the blanket statement I'm going to say, which is true about both of those places, is that I found growing up was really excruciating for me. That's especially true about when I was a teenager. There was just a lot of loneliness and dislocation. I had moved from Flushing to Massachusetts. I was meeting my father for the first time. Like it was a bewildering time for me to be a teen. And being a teen is hard enough just out of the gate, but there were a lot of family dynamics there. The same thing is true, I think, of my life in Flushing because, in Flushing, I experienced poverty, of course. My mom worked in a factory, there was very little money. And so, what it's like to grow up really on the edge of being able to survive economically. I mean, I never went hungry or any such thing, but money was always a present pressure and factor. But in Flushing, I was growing up with my mother and my aunts. It was a big Cuban family. There were a lot of stories about Cuba, about what their lives had been there, about, their neighbors and friends. We had a Cuban community in Flushing, like a lot of immigrant communities. Like we find each other and we share stories, and it's a grounding, right? It's like we're in this new place and we have a life here. I was born in the US, so I was absolutely going to be part of the US landscape. But there was a before. There was a before that mattered. There was a before and customs and ideas that shaped my family and how we interacted. And so both of those things, I think, come through in works. In Flushing, for example, in the seventh grade, I attended junior high school, which I'm sure still exists there. At the time, pretty rough place. And in the seventh grade, a girl came up to me in a rabbit fur coat in the schoolyard, and she said words that stayed with me for decades, which was, Yaqui Delgado's going to kick your ass. And I spent the rest of my middle school years, then it was seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. That's how that school was organized then, like completely in fear. I checked out of school. I started cutting school. I started lying to my mother. I did a lot of really awful things, which was part of the reason that I eventually ended up going to live with my father. So that experience that was so damaging at the hands of a bully, and not feeling like I could really talk to my mother about what was happening. I just didn't think she could understand what it was like to go to school in a place like that. I put it in the novel, Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. And I added in what it felt like to not trust the school administration and what it feels like to be in the crosshairs of a bully and the questions I had about my dad. Like there's a lot of autobiographical stuff in there. And then I make up things that people I wish had been there. Like Lila is a character in there, a neighbor who'd like defend Pity to the end with a plunger handle. And I didn't have a Lila, but boy, I gave myself one in the novel. And in Merci, which is a much sweeter story, I pull on the sweeter parts of my life, the aunts who loved me, my grandparents, the neurotic things, that my grandmother used to say. She worried that I was going to die all the time by choking on a bean or doing other silly things. And so I took those lighter, sweeter moments and made them part of Mercy's family. So I don't know, you're never far from your life when you're writing. And when you're writing for kids and you're my age, you become yourself again at that age, but you have the benefit of some perspective. Like you have the benefit that you survived it. So what you're laying in your book, right, is what you know, sort of what you know now, or what you think now about this thing that happened to you. And the amazing part is that so many years separate me from my readers, right? But when you tell the truth, that's where the connection is. And that's been the fun part, that you could say hard things about growing up to kids and they recognize it and they want to talk about it and they want to say what's hard about their growing up now.
Did you ever resolve the Yaqui Delgado problem in real life?
Oh, well, back then, the dean brought us both into his office to become friends. You can imagine how that went. Um, and yeah, it was the dark ages of how we dealt with bullying. People often ask me, did she ever find you? And do you know what happened to her? Like in my fantasy, I thought maybe prison. But then I thought, people who become bullies sometimes, sadly, they have the ability to make people do what they want and to galvanize people to their side, even when they're wrong and they're being vicious. So, for all I know, this young woman who was my torturer could be running a big company. You don't know. So, all I could do was just sort of write my truth and let it exist on the page. Yeah.
Many of your books, including the award-winning Mango, Abuela, and Me,
Mm.
celebrate family and cultural connections. How do you approach blending these personal and cultural themes into your stories?
Oh, you know what? It's the easiest thing. Here's how. I have this set of eyeballs and this being, right? I write the truth. So I write what we ate, I write how we talk, I write the arguments that we have, the loving moments that we have. I write the truth, which is what makes me laugh. Like people get so, especially now, where it's like this fear of diverse narratives or books that feature people from different countries or different backgrounds or different traditions. When you're writing for children in particular, you have to write the truth because kids really can smell a rat. That is especially true of teenagers, but all kids can smell when you're telling something that's not true or fake. And so the incredible thing that I have found out is that when I write a story that's honestly true, like what we were eating or what we were saying or whatever, even kids who are from completely different backgrounds find the common ground, find the universal thing. Because the fact is that whether I eat empanadas and frijoles negros and somebody else is eating naan and somebody else is eating something else or has different cultural beliefs. At the core, we want to be loved, we want friends, we value family, we have fun, we have things that are funny. Like there are so many things that are universal about being human. And the fun thing is to be able to write the truth from my little lane, from my perspective, and see, that added in to all the stories that we have out there as part of the human story, right? Which is why, like, I love to read books by authors from completely different backgrounds. I feel like I learn language. I feel like I get insights. I learn history sometimes that I hadn't learned at all, somehow in school or have forgotten or whatever. It's really valuable. And it's really affirming to see we are really distinct and different, and that's a beautiful thing. And that we also have a lot of threads that knit us together.
Your books, including Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass, have faced challenges and bans in some communities. How has this experience with censorship shaped your perspective as an author, and what impact do you think it has on your readers?
So yes, it has been banned. And I'm thinking of Florida. There's Clay County, Florida, for example, that banned it. Sometimes it gets soft censorship, which you also have to be careful of. That's like when you have to bring a permission slip to get the book out, or when the librarian keeps it behind her desk and you have to ask for the book specially for it. Though that's soft censorship. Yes, the book is available, but it has all kinds of obstacles. I oppose that just out of the gate. I trust kids to read and to make, opinions about the books that they read. It makes zero impact on me in terms of what I write. I will continue to write stories that are honest, in my view, that are respectful of children and respectful of people's experience. Hard stop. Insofar as what I think the impact is on the reader, two things. Like one thing is if the book is kept from you and you don't know it exists, it disappears and it robs readers a chance to experience that story and have their own opinions about it. Sometimes it's chilling effect, what is it about this book? Like, is there such a thing as a bad book? Or why should I not be reading it? And on the other hand, sometimes it really galvanizes young people. I'm thinking this is a perfect example, this podcast, right? So why would you ban this? Why are you trying to keep this from me? Why don't you trust what my brain to read and make my own opinions, thoughtful opinions, pro or con to whatever I see in the book? So it's hard to tell. My hope, especially as we are facing more and more challenges, is that kids step up and find ways to find the books and insist that the books remain available.
With the rise of book bans targeting stories that reflect diverse experiences, what do you believe is at stake when access to inclusive literature is restricted? How can we push back against this trend?
Yeah, I think what's at stake is your basic right to read. And I think children have a right to read also. I'm not saying that you should give Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass to somebody in kindergarten. I'm not saying that. I think we shelve books appropriately, more or less, and that's why we have trained librarians with advanced degrees who can assess books based on the content of the book, the age range that it's been pitched for in terms of publishing and so on. I trust librarians, and I feel like they've been dragged through the mud and are being continue to face these difficulties with people calling them pornographers and bad for children and things like that. And those are painful words to people, to teachers and librarians and authors who've spent their life, their professional life, thinking about and centering children in their creative and professional lives. I feel like the hard truth is that young people are going to need to step up on their own behalf. No one is coming to rescue us. So we need to step forward when books are pulled from your library, when there's a school board meeting challenging a book, when you get wind of librarians in trouble, to stand up and support those books, support the librarians, and support choice. Nobody is forcing everybody to read every book. You always have the right to close a book that you do not enjoy. What I don't think anyone has the right to do is decide that a book that I don't like, you are not allowed to read. It's just, for me, that feels counter to what I've always believed about reading and freedom and our right to read. I feel like following this podcast, getting involved like with the National Coalition Against Censorship, NCAC. They have a whole website that has like student toolkits and so on that kids can use. ALA is another place, but like getting involved in the issue and not just deciding that somebody else is going to take care of it for you.
You mentioned a lot how young people can help to push back against censorship, but how can other maybe adults like maybe librarians or parents, how can they push back?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting really active at your school, volunteering in the library, being part of, like, lots of schools have review committees for books, making sure that, you volunteer, make time for that, not looking the other way in your community if your community starts pulling books off the shelf, making your opinion known. Like, you can think something is bad, but if you keep it to yourself and don't share that, it becomes really easy to ignore you or pretend that your opinion or your thoughts about this issue don't exist. So be vocal. Be vocal. And it's so uncomfortable. I understand. I'm someone who doesn't relish conflict either. And I'm not seeking conflict with people. I'm just wanting folks to think long and hard about the fairness of what it is that they're proposing when they're yanking books off of shelves.
Your dedication to uplifting young readers through authentic and powerful storytelling has had a lasting impact. By
Mm.
championing the importance of diverse stories, you remind us why representation matters. Thank you so much for joining us today, Meg, and we can't wait to see what inspiring stories you'll share with us next.
Thanks, Christopher. Have a great day.